Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the June 12th edition of Beyond the Data. Tonight we have with us one former college student and a current college student who are both plaintiffs in Warner Mendenhall suits. Ben Lipp is a graduate of University of Cincinnati out of finance, right?
Yeah. That's correct.
Yeah. And we have Tyce Patt, who is a current student at Ohio University. So both of them are plaintiffs, and you guys did some amazing stuff looking at public records requests in your frustration with what your schools were telling you and not telling you. And this has been something near and dear to me for a long time because just with absolutely everything with related to COVID, all of these institutions are lying to us and we know it, and they're hiding things. And it's been a major frustration of mine knowing that they have this information, or knowing that they have information, knowing that they're concealing things, but talking about it and not knowing how to get at that. So I asked the two of you to come on and talk about all the things that you have learned in your process of making public records requests and trying to give us a nice tutorial on how to go about it. And I specifically wanted you guys to talk about how to do it in the state of Ohio, because every state in the country has different laws that we're dealing with these kinds of things, and it's all kind of messed up. But if we can focus on Ohio, because that's where we are, and we can help people learn how to use our laws in their own localities, I think that can be an extremely powerful tool to use. So before we get into this whole tutorial thing, I'd like you guys to just very briefly talk about some of the most interesting things that you guys have found in your public requests with your universities. And so, Ben, do you want to go first?
Yeah, I can start. Yeah, I mostly focused on emails, and the majority of it is really what you're seeing is like the administrative background of what's actually happening, because the messaging at universities is so sterilized. They just kind of, it's all uniform, and you don't actually understand any of like what they say never makes any sense. So when you actually get to read their emails of them planning everything, they're all relaxed. They're totally different people. And so you can just imagine already the kind of stuff you see. I mean, there's like my favorite few emails that I found was like they did this big survey about us wanting the vaccine, and then they just lied about the results, even though if you see them discussing it, the results were like far weighted against their favor. Things like that. There's another guy that described students as playing a game of chicken with him because they didn't want to get vaccinated. And he, like, his outward persona to people is totally different. He's like the superhero doctor that's saving all of us. But when he's talking to his coworkers, he has no respect for our freedom. And just kind of general, like, distaste like that. And a widespread awareness that what they were doing was against state law. Like outward discussions that they were like, oh, well, this law is written this way, and it seems like what we're doing isn't totally legal. And then, as you'll find out, we'll probably discuss, like, if their lawyers say anything, that's going to be redacted. But if the doctors are talking about legal problems, they can't redact that. And they just didn't care. And of course, there's all sorts of motives for why, but
Yeah.
mostly just the distaste they had towards students is what I found shocking.
Unfortunate. Tyce, do you have what was your most interesting find that you had?
I would say my favorite one is one that Ben got and showed me, like when he was first showing me how to do record requests. It was the Cabal email, and so it was this group from not every school in Ohio. They have the Inter-University Council, which is every school in Ohio, but it's like a core group of, it was Toledo, UC, OU, OSU, and they literally called themselves the Cabal. So like Ben was saying, like how they just show, they really, like, just the way they talk about us and talk about themselves. Like, it's really crazy to see people like really like that. And these are the presidents and the top people at our universities calling all the shots. That it's just crazy to see how they think about us. And then there was all sorts of stuff just from like Ohio University, which was great. Talking about how it's easier to like manipulate students when they're away from their parents on campus, because their parents might be able to say, oh, maybe you shouldn't take this vaccine. But when you're on campus, there's no parent to be there. So the school can act like that parent and tell you that you should get the vaccine, even if that really isn't obviously what a lot of parents have seen. Like, that's not what you want to recommend your healthy kid to do. And so at saveohiou.com, we've posted a lot of all the like good emails that just show like some of the stuff they talk about. It's a good example, like to look, because every school has these same setups. So we'll get into a lot of that. But yeah, that's where like I post all my favorite ones I find.
And then can I segue real quick?
Yeah, sure.
So to Tyce mentioning, this made me want to point something out, because we're going to talk a lot about how to do the public record requests. But as far as like the utility of doing them and how they can help you, this was a good example, the Cabal email. So put shortly, this was with the organization he was talking about is the Inter-University Council, which is like it's almost like a union for rich university executives. Like it's all the state universities are members, but it's voluntary. And they have insurance agreements for all the schools, and they have purchasing agreements. So, and it's not Ohio State. Ohio State's their fiscal sponsor. So all the state schools pay annual dues to Ohio State, who funnels it into the IUC. And then they all get to meet behind the scenes. They even meet with the governor, but none of their meetings are public. So if they went to the Department of Higher Education, which is like the central group of our state universities that we thought was calling all the shots, well, if they go meet at the Department of Higher Ed, they have to record those meetings and let the public watch them if they want to. But if they meet at the IUC, anything goes. They can talk about whatever they want. And the Cabal thing was, there was a small group of people, like every school sends a couple representatives to the IUC. Like they all have their own jobs at the IUC. It's like a secret society for losers. But there was 5 of them that made their own secret society within the secret society, and they refer to themselves as the core Cabal. And going to the utility of public records, when I started looking at the IUC, which I was doing all my record requests through Ohio State as their fiscal sponsor, I started just finding general corruption within the organization about how they're using their money. And one of the things I noticed was when all the state schools were like making agreements with the Department of Higher Education for their budgeting for that year, the core group was like sharing things with each other that they weren't supposed to share with other schools. And they were only sharing it within the core group. So I took all these emails and I sent it to representatives at the IUC from every state school. And I was like, these schools are talking behind your back. And because not only like when you're reading public records, you're seeing things that people's coworkers aren't seeing. You're seeing things that people's managers are seeing, but they aren't. And they're unaware of these things going on. So there's a certain amount of just disruption you can cause just by becoming aware of these things.
Exactly. I mean, one of the things that I'm most excited. I really hope parents of K through 12 students can really use this, because in the end, nobody knows their own schools like the locals. I mean, one of the biggest problems with this whole madness that's been going on is it's too overwhelming. I've focused myself very much on Ohio simply because the U.S. is too big, the world is too big, but Ohio is something I can grasp. I can understand what's going on here. I understand the geography and the politics, and it's something small enough to affect, where you can actually create some kind of a change at a smaller level. It might not be massive or anything like that, but at a smaller level. And especially in the instances of K through 12 schools, there's just so many of them. There's over 600 K through 12 school districts in the state of Ohio, and lawsuits are expensive, and it's just too much. But there are other ways to put pressure on these institutions, because especially in local K through 12 districts, those board members are elected and everybody knows everybody in a small area, and exactly this kind of stuff where you have that really inappropriate behavior that they might be saying behind or in emails, where they say one thing in the public and say something completely else in emails that they're not thinking about are public records. And we have all these K through 12 schools were just going crazy. I mean, they were instituting all these. I mean, they still were up until the end of the year. There were some schools that had reinstituted mask mandates already this spring, when there's no COVID anywhere of any variety, but they already reinstituted it. We know that those schools are going to go and start it all up again in the fall, and put all this pressure, do the quarantines, do it all over again. And it is a problem. Lawsuits are expensive. They're really slow. And there's got to be a way to bring it to the fore. And it's when it comes to just your simple locality, you can write a letter to the editor and show what you find. It's something that's within individuals' power to actually affect something close to them. And that's one of the things that I'm really excited about this. And you guys, when we talked before, you guys were great with all the little hints that you had for making it very effective. But I think we should start with the most basic, just walk us through the most step-by-step process here that we've got going on. First, maybe start with the sunshine law itself and get familiar with it, and that might be good. And then the beautiful presentation that Tyce has there. So Ben, do you want to talk about the sunshine law and how it applies here? And then we can get into the nitty gritty.
Because I know a lot of his slides cover that, but here I'll share the manual real quick, just so we can get an idea.
I've got the link
on
here
my screen. I just shared it. I don't know if you can see it.
Yep.
So yeah, this is the Ohio Sunshine Manual. You can Google that. It'll come up. They release a new copy every year by Dave Yost, our Attorney General. Ohio actually likes to, this administration was really into expanding our public record laws, which is perhaps one of the few things they did correctly. But it's actually, Ohio is very friendly to us because we don't have to pay record custodians to look for the records we want. There is a little interpretation in the law, but that's really just, it's supposed to make things simpler. But effectively, people often hear FOIA requests, which is Freedom of Information Act. Technically speaking, this is different. This is a state process. So this only applies to state institutions. And I think the law itself, I've read it a long time ago. It's pretty brief, which is how it usually is. And then it's interpreted by a bunch of different agencies. But effectively, what you have to remember is that the law is written and interpreted by the courts in such a way that the release of records takes precedent over the difficulty for these state institutions to find the records. So if it's a close call, whether or not your request is legitimate, they're supposed to release the records. They're supposed to err on the side of releasing too much, which is really the most important thing. But just to summarize this document, really all this is it's a textbook on Ohio public records. So you can see at the start, they're defining what's a public office. So how do you define something in Ohio that this law applies to? And then what's a record? How do you, within those institutions from the first part, what of the things that they create, what are public records? And most things are. So you can see here emails, notes, drafts, anything that they put pen to paper or print out is a public record, even PDFs, anything they create effectively. And I think Tyce's PowerPoint goes into that a little more.
Yeah,
and
so
then
maybe
the rest of it is really just administrative. Yeah, we can get into that.
Yeah, you have some good case law coming up here too, how to use that. So yeah, let's go to Tyce's nice little PowerPoint he put together here. You want to take it away, Tyce?
Yeah, sure. So I think, so this first page is just the Ohio Sunshine Manual reiterated, because we're going to talk about this a lot. And it's literally the saving grace. If you ever have a question, the answer's in here. As Ben will talk about, there's great case law referenced all throughout it for every situation. And so you could scan that QR code or the links there, and we also put it in the chat for the one that's out now. But if you're watching this in a year from now, you can just Google it and you'll probably find the new one.
Well, and the comments are here. The comments will always be attached to this video on Facebook too. So anything in the chat stays with this video.
So yeah, so in the Sunshine Manual, it'll go over and describe in detail what exactly is a public record. So if you have questions about something, that's the best resource to know for sure. So, but these are just some common examples and like some of the best things that I've found to try to request and find the information we're looking for. So emails are the big one. Emails are great because a lot of these employees, especially the ones at the K through 12 public schools, I doubt they know. A lot of them don't even know, like we were talking about the other day. Maybe they get it in like their training and their onboarding. They tell them that their emails could be released to the public, but most of them don't know. And so that's why we've seen them say some pretty crazy stuff because they don't expect anybody to hold them accountable and look at their emails. But it is your right for these public government employees. Meeting minutes and notes. So the Ohio Open Meetings Act, I think, is that what it's called, Ben? I'm actually not sure.
Yeah, the Open Meetings Act, correct.
Okay, so yeah, the Open Meetings Act applies to this too. Meetings are public record. We talked a little about how the IUC can avoid that, but meeting minutes are great to request because a lot of these offices are required to have them for every meeting. And then documents and agreements. So the one that's on there might be hard to see, but that's just the higher education relief funds, the agreement that's the University of Akron. So that's the agreement they signed with the state, what they would do with the $17 million they were going to be given under the CARES Act that first time. And so knowing what records to look for, this is kind of how we talked about everybody knows their local community best, right? So for me at Ohio University, I knew Jillian Ice here was appointed as the special assistant for public health operations. And so you know that most things are going through her that are related to this. Obviously, the president and his office also basically has to agree with everything, sign off on it. So knowing like who those people are at your organization is a great starting point because we'll kind of talk about how to format requests and knowing their names, their emails, even voicemails. I don't know how they have that on record, but I know voicemails are also public record. COVID funding agreements, we talked about that just previously, and then emails containing keywords from key people. That's kind of the big one that I was talking about there.
Yeah, if I could expand on a few things you just said, like when it comes to the types of records, I think the best part about the emails is that, and you have to remember, especially during like 2020, 2021, everybody was working from home. So everything was being done through email. So those other types of documents, they, depending on the institution, sometimes when you do a record request on emails, you'll be able to click on the links that they were sending each other to. So they'll also include all attachments on the emails. Now, they don't always include the attachments, but you'll always be able to read it. At the very least, you can read what they attach to these emails. So the other types of documents and the meeting minutes, everything like that, these things are being emailed between them so that they have them on their computer, like the PDFs. So the email, its utility goes beyond just seeing their communications because you also get access to all the relevant documents that they were sending each other. And so like in the instance where they don't send you the attachments, all you have to do is send in another request saying I want a copy of this document. And there's a funny story about that actually. Regarding that survey that they lied about UC, there was this email where our head doctor, so Jillian Ice is at Ohio University, we had Dr. Dustin Calhoun. He has this email where he sends it to one of the communications people at UC, and he attached these two PDFs, and he was like, these are confidential. Like he said it in all caps, like do not share PDFs. But of course, the PDFs he sent were public records, so they weren't actually confidential. And that's a great example of why email is so great, because you find so much through that method. And one other note, for if anybody has students attending these schools, this is more likely to apply to universities. But like, for example, at UC on our Outlook account, you can look up any employee at the institution on their Outlook. And if you click on their profile, it shows you who works under them and who works above them. So that's another great way. You find the poster child for COVID at your institution. And then you're like, well, who do they work with? And one of the best people to request emails for is any sort of like secretary or administrative assistant. So like you'll have this team of executives working on something, request emails from the person who's planning all their meetings, because that's the person that's sending all the information out to everybody. So it's you as you do requests, you learn more about the institution, which makes it easier to target your requests more in the future. Like the first request is always going to be a lot of information. And then everyone after that, you're going after specific details.
Yeah, one question I had actually when I advertised this thing was an issue between in Summit County where with the I believe it was a private school and the Summit County Health Department, where one person tried to request communication between those two, and they said, oh, we can't, that's too broad. You have to choose just 2 days that you can ask for that information between. And I see in the comment here to make sure about when you're using dates and stuff, and that's one thing I had said as well, where it's like you don't know where to start all the time, but we know when things were coming out in a big flurry, and you start looking for those places to anchor to. And 2020 and 2021, we know they were doing lots of crazy stuff all at once, and we could probably pinpoint some good times in that. There's also another question here about the University of Dayton here and specific concerns there and what they're going to do in the fall. That's one of the things I like about this whole public records request. You can start, you don't have to just speculate. You can. Although
Dayton is not subjected to those laws.
Why not?
It's a private university.
Oh, is it a private university?
It is.
Well, but you can still do some kinds of public records requests if they are interacting with a public entity. It's more work, I would imagine, because you don't get quite the ease of going after everything within your own university. But anything that's going out of that school, you can start requesting. Like I would suspect, actually. They would be communicating back and forth with the it's Montgomery County, right? Yeah. Health department. That might be a good way to start going after them too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Health departments, they're going to talk to the Department of Higher Ed, and for K through 12, they're going to talk to the Department of Ed too. It makes it harder because you got to come at it from the individual agencies communicating with them, where in a public school, you can request from the public school and it is all their communications. It doesn't really matter who it's from.
Now, they may have some even the private institutions, I feel like I've seen some mention of this, they might have an obligation to release their own records that have to do with the government. But it would probably be, if you could figure out who they were dealing with, that would be the best option, to go directly with the public institution, because they're going to be more prepared and less defensive. They'll be defensive, but I'm sure Dayton would put up a big fight being private.
Yeah, Holly asked, they had a town hall where they made the new policy. Since it's a private school, I don't believe it would fall under the Open Meetings Act, but like Ben said, there might be.
Yeah, so this could be a good time to actually reference the Sunshine Manual.
Right.
Sure thing. I can pull it up too, I think. It might be a little more stable on.
It should be on page 2 is what we want. Let me see, I'll share it here.
You have it?
Yeah. All right. So you see this, what is a public office?
Yeah.
So any state agency, public institution,
Zoom
political
in
subdivision.
a little bit there, Ben.
What was that?
Zoom in a little bit on it. It's pretty tiny.
Okay, so Yeah, any state agency, public institution, political subdivision, or other organized body, office, agency, institution, or entity established by the laws of this state for the exercise of any function of government. So then here's some examples. So yeah, you see here nonprofit corporations that receive and solicit gifts for a public university. So that would be like the UC Foundation. Yeah, and then the private equity funds, I think that would be like pension funds effectively. So yeah, it's when it comes to private universities, they're not by definition a public office. Now, despite the fact that number 2 says private entities can be public offices, but I think and so see, it depends on their level of government funding. So yeah, I mean, these schools get a lot of money from the government, and it would be worth a shot to email their general counsel, which you should be able to find the University of Dayton general counsel, and just ask them if they have any obligation to release public records as far as their collaboration with state government goes. But I think what would be best is to, again, start with like the local health departments and whatnot and ask for communication that has to do with the University of Dayton. But we'll get more into like phrasing requests here in a second, I believe.
Yeah. Excuse me. Yeah, let's go back to going through the line by line here.
All right. So we kind of talked about using keywords, and Ben, you can talk about the case law, about the wheelchair and everything in a second, how that relates to this. But especially when you're doing your first request, you're not really going to know exactly what you're looking for, like we kind of said. So like some great things, like you'll know better too. Like some of these are still kind of broad just because it's like an example. But the House bills and the Senate bills that were directly related to mandating vaccines and other COVID mandates in Ohio, those were great keywords to look up because they were always talking about these bills because they were worried. And there's a bunch of other ones that didn't ever pass anything and were just talked about at the state house, and they talked about those too. So that's a good way to find their emails when they're specifically saying things like, is our policy breaking the law if this passes? And usually they admit that it is. So yeah, it's like community, and then I think we talk a little more about it, but what you want to do is you want to pair keywords with dates and a specific person. So Ben, if you want to talk about kind of overly broad and everything.
Yeah, so this is kind of getting into the art, you could call it, of making a record request. Again, it's all designed so anybody can do it. It's designed so there doesn't need to be a lawyer involved at all. Now, for emails, if you're requesting emails from a state university, all the state universities use the same software to access their emails. So you can request keywords because they have the ability to search for all the emails containing a particular keyword from a particular sender or recipient at a certain date range. That's their qualifications. But when we're talking about K through 12 institutions, they probably very rarely get record requests because relative to a university, they're a lot smaller. And like the big universities in Ohio, the state ones, they have attorneys that work for them that are dedicated to processing record requests. So they have like a records department. I did a request in my high school, and they just had to use they have like one attorney that does everything, and he had to do the record requests. But it's not something he's used to. So if you start making record requests at your K through 12 institution, you should expect that the people processing them aren't familiar with the laws and the regulations. But as far as like keywords, now there's going back to the Sunshine Manual, that if you could go back to the overly broad slide, because I think that's important. So there's one of the big standards of our Sunshine laws is this overly broad standard, which you can see this is how they define it in the manual. And it starts by saying all records containing particular names or words would be an example of a request that's overly broad. Now, the all records thing is very important. And if I could share my screen here, I'm going to show you the University of Cincinnati's general record schedule. So this is an example of what you would call a record schedule. Now, again, K through 12 institutions probably haven't produced these, but they may. You can always look up your institution's website and search record schedule, or email their attorney and ask, or email somebody in the administration and ask them if they have a record schedule. So that what this is this is UC defining all the different categories of records. And as you can see on the right, their retention period. So records eventually get destroyed and they get transferred to archive. And if it's past the retention period, they have no obligation to release them to you. And if I can find it here, spell here. So like executive correspondence is, well, I can tell you, I won't be able to find it, but executive correspondence at UC, which is emails between the people who are making the decisions, those have a retention period of 2 years. So that would mean that the furthest back I could request for emails at UC now would be June of 2020. So we're already getting close to the first semester coming back from the first shutdowns. And now every institution is going to have different retention periods. And some institutions might not even be aware there's a retention period. So I would still encourage you to try to request for records more than 2 years old, because if they don't bring it up, then you don't have to worry about it. But this is where it gets complicated, because if you can bring the slides up again to bring the overly broad standard back. So I showed you that record retention schedule because it says here all records containing particular names or words. So what that's saying is you can't request for, like, the case law, which I could show here shortly, that created this standard was this lady, like one of them was that this lady went to the police department and said she wanted every document they had with her name on it. But that's an overly broad request because she didn't specify the category of record she was looking for. So if she would have said, I want every police report with my name on it, they could have sent that to her because they could go look at the police reports and find the ones with her name on it. This standard is just here because they need, at the very least, we need to be able to give these people a request that they can actually fulfill. They're only supposed to invoke the overly broad standard if your request is so broad that their office literally doesn't know what you want. And again, going back to the theme that they're supposed to side with us. So that this should be used sparingly, but it won't be. What you'll find is that 99% of the time you'll send in a request, no matter how broad or how broad it isn't, they're going to tell you it's too broad and you'll have to fight them. And so, but going shortly back to the keywords, the reason that we can use keywords for emails is because we're not requesting all records with those keywords. We're only requesting emails with those keywords between these employees and this date range. So our request isn't overly broad because we're defining other characteristics of the records we're seeking. And all we have to do is define them enough that they can find them, being specific. But you also have to remember that you want to be as broad as you can. So that's the goal, is to make the request, especially the first request. You want to make a request that's as broad as possible and they'll still fulfill it because you want to get a lot of information quickly, and these requests take a long time to process. So the first request you make, now my personal recommendation as the first request you make, and the one that would be the most difficult for them to deny, would be at a K through 12 institution. I would stray from the keywords because they're going to get really fussy about that. And keywords are better when, like Tyce was saying, you can do HB 244 as a keyword if you want to target discussion on that particular bill in Ohio. But if you're looking for your first request where you want general information about the entire COVID response, it might be better to use a subject matter instead of a keyword. And now I'll share my screen. Let me find the correct one. Regarding, yes, here we go. Okay. So this is an example Well, first let's take a little trip to the Sunshine Manual first.
Make sure you're sharing your screen there so I can follow.
Yeah. I'm not good with computers. It's my weakness. All right, so we'll go to overly broad. Okay, so this is the part that Tyce pulled out for that slide. So you can see here all records containing particular names or words. Now here, if my screen isn't too small, you'll see that there's a little like superscript next to that says 109. So that's in reference. So what you can do is you're going to send in a record request, and they're going to be like, your record request is overly broad. And now, as soon as they deny your request, the first email you send back is, if they don't give you case law. So they're supposed to, if they deny a request, they're supposed to say, we're denying your request for this reason, and we can use this reason because of this case law. And they'll give you like somebody versus something, like Ketterson versus Kent State is like one of the favorites. Or in this case, or there's a bunch of different ones. But then what you can do is, like, if they say your request is overly broad, you go to the Sunshine Manual, you do Control F, you type in overly broad, it brings you here, and then they said it was overly broad because it was all records containing particular names or words. And then it says 109 here. So then you just scroll down past everything until you get to the next really tiny print. And then you'll find 109, which in this case is the state versus Ixman, which is one of the case laws that created this standard. And now I don't have that one pulled up, but what I can show you is another one that also has to do with the broad standard. And because what you'll find, you can copy and paste that case law into Google, pull up the lawsuit, and read about their records dispute. And they'll reference, within those, they'll reference other case law. So what the trick here is, you make them provide case law as to why they're denying your request, and then you go read the case law they provide and find all the discrepancies between your request and the request in those case laws, and then you send them back an email making them explain how they were able to use that if it's not a good excuse. So it's not perfectly simple, but it's not as difficult as you'd think, because again, they have to side with release. So
no does not mean no in this instance. No means watch me.
No means later. Yeah. No means we really don't want to give you your records because it takes a lot of time, and we don't have time for that. Okay, so here's one that I already have pulled up. So this is what I was talking about, subject matter. So this is a person who got fired.
Magnification again. And if you can move if you can take away the preview on the left, it helps with the size. Oh, there, that helps.
But it doesn't let me scroll. This is.
Oh.
Yeah. Wait. There. Okay, wait. I'm sorry. I don't think I could do that. I'm not skilled enough with my computer. Okay, but here, for an example of why I'm saying that for K-12 institutions, using a subject matter instead of a keyword might be better. Because here, this is somebody who got fired from Kent State, I believe, and she wanted to know why. She wanted to figure out why she got fired, so she was doing record requests on their emails, and they denied them. So she filed a lawsuit against them for denying her record request. And one of the opinions was, while Kesterson did cast a wide net for quote-unquote communications, she limited each request temporally by subject matter, and in all but one instance by the specific employees concerned. So what is this saying? So, and then they're going on to say that because she did that, it was a legitimate request. So limiting each request temporally, which means you're providing a time frame that you're interested in. By subject matter, you're providing a subject matter. And specific employees concerned. So when we're talking about emails, when you request, and when it comes to temporally, there's all sorts of like different case law that's affects that, but 6 months is a reasonable amount of time. Like when you said earlier that they denied it because they said you can only do 2 days, that's nonsense. Nobody thinks 2 days is a long enough time frame to matter. 6 months is what I would always do, unless I really specifically had a specific time frame in mind. I would start with 6 months. So that's my temporal limitation. Subject matter, you can keep it simple. You can always start by just saying COVID response or mandatory vaccination or masking policy. That could be your subject matter. So you're not saying I want all emails containing the keyword mask. You're saying I want all emails where they're discussing masking policy. Now, the funny thing is, it would be easier for them to use keywords, but they'll deny it based on that it's too broad. So instead, you say, I want everything to do with masking. So then they have to find the emails where they're discussing masking policy, even if they don't mention the word mask, which just makes their lives harder, but that's how they want it to be. And specific employees concerned, what I'll say is, like an example of a request I might do is, I want emails sent to and from Dr. Dustin Calhoun between the dates of June 1st, 2020 and December 31st, 2020, pertaining to the university's COVID-19 response or pertaining to mandatory vaccination. And then I'll say, and I think Tyce will get into this more, but you'll say like, and I request that these emails be returned to me via digital file no later than this date. And I think that a reasonable, if you're doing a 6-month request, you can give them like a month and a half to 2 months. That's going to be a reasonable amount of time. But the reason that you set a date is, this is another screen sharing opportunity, I think. You want to go back to the manual here. So there's this reasonable time standard. So this is all going back, this all stems again from the case law. So this whole manual is just a summary of all the lawsuits filed in Ohio's history pertaining to public record law. This is just a summary of that. And the state didn't set a time frame that public institutions have to respond to your request. The reason they didn't set it is because there's too much variation in the real world. Like, some schools might be more equipped to process them and they'll send them out quickly, but other schools might not be. So all the courts will say is, what was the request processed in a reasonable time or not? So if they spend 2 months denying your request, even though it was legitimate, and just pushing it off and not responding to you, if they spend 2 months without even starting your record request, that's unreasonable. If they start it a couple days after they receive it, but it takes them 2 months, because like if you have a record request that has 20,000 emails, somebody at that school has to read every email, because there's certain, and the manual talks about this, there's certain information that's not public record, like certain personal information. If you're talking about a school, information that pertains to students is redacted because of their privacy concerns and privacy law. And so they have to go through every email they're going to send you and make sure there's no non-record information in them. And they redact them by putting like a black line through that portion of an email. Also, like another category would be like anytime they're talking with an attorney because of attorney-client privilege, they can redact that. So they always seem slow, but only sometimes are they reasonably slow, because it is a timely effort for them to process the request. But that's why you set some boundaries at the start, and you say, I expect these to be delivered by this date. But you have to make it somewhat realistic, because if you're being unreasonable, then that's only going to hurt you in the long run. So, because even if you set 2 months, a lot of the time you're not going to have your records in 2 months. But what you can do then is, like 2 weeks out, you can email them again and be like, hey, how is my record request going? Like, and always ask them for an estimated date of delivery. Now, if you're working with a seasoned record custodian will never tell you when they think your record request is going to be ready. Because if they miss that date, they have no defense against the reasonable time standard, because they're saying that they didn't even produce it in the time that they said was reasonable. But always ask them when they expect your record request to be complete. And perhaps you could even do this before setting your own time frame for them. Because if they give you a date and they miss the date, that's when you can turn the heat up on them and say, hey, in Ohio, you have to process my request within a reasonable amount of time. and you haven't even processed it within the time frame that you laid out for me. So you have to use these things to your advantage, the case law to your advantage, because like I said, at the K through 12 institutions, there's going to be people processing requests that don't even realize there's a reasonable time standard. They don't even realize that there's an overly broad standard. They'll just deny your request because they don't want to do it. And that's why you have to say, if you deny my request, I need legal reasoning for it, because then they have to go do research and figure out how to deny the request. And that might be so timely of a process that they just end up processing your request for you. And last thing, before I go back, regarding the redactions, like I was saying, there's like FERPA protected information, there's attorney-client privilege information. Anything they redact in your original record request. So we have time frame, we have employees that sent to and from this employee, and we have a subject matter. And then we have a date that we expect them to complete it, and or asking them when they expect to complete it. And then, oh no, I'm losing my train of thought here. What was I saying, Tyce? Redactions. And then say that, and mention that you want it returned to you via digital file. But then say, if any redactions are made to the records, provide legal reasoning for each redaction. So what that means is anytime they make a redaction, they have to cite the law that says they can redact that information. So like sometimes they have to use multiple types of redactions, and they have to define every type of redaction they do. That's in the Sunshine Manual. That's one of their obligations if you request it. So you want to request, by requesting them to do everything that you have the power to request, one, that makes them less likely, it makes them aware that you are aware of their obligation. So they're less likely to just push you off without putting effort in. And also it makes sure that everything's in compliance. Like that way, if they redact something, I've even had, like at UC, they have multiple record custodians. And when you're doing emails, a lot of the times you'll get different record requests that have the same emails, because these emails are sent between multiple employees. So one time I had an email that was sent to me by one record custodian, which it was a really important email. This was an email where they were discussing breaking the law. And it was a bunch of doctors discussing the law. So the first person that sent it to me redacted the email, and they said that the redaction was due to attorney-client privilege. But I was like, there's no attorneys on this email. It's just a bunch of doctors. How could this be privileged information? And then on a separate, like months later, from a separate record custodian, I got the email completely unredacted, because it was my favorite record custodian. He's very well aware of all the laws. And so he didn't redact it because he knew that doctors discussing a legal matter isn't privileged information. And then that caused a whole mess, because I was like, you guys made an illegal redaction. Like now I can see the whole email, and I can see that it shouldn't have been redacted. So make them, anytime they do something to hide something from you, make them explain it, because they have to.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic. So one question I do want to ask you guys, you've referred to some of these very useful case law things, like the one about the subject matter and stuff. Would you be able, and I'm sure there are probably a couple other ones that are most useful for pushing back against the common excuses, which I'm assuming are usually going to be exactly that, overly broad or whatever. Would you be able to have make a short list of what ones those are that are pertinent at some point, and I can get it posted up here, if you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, I could do that. But again, like there's so many variations. The manual really is the best place to start, because that does have all the lists. But I could put together some of the best hits. But also, like another thing, that's why you make them send you the case law, because then they have to find it, and then you get to read it and interpret it. So it's really, like, I've used so many different, because every record custodian has different case law that they like to use. So there's so much variation. It's really, the important thing about the case law is comparing your request to the request in the case law. Because if they're nothing alike, you can point that out and just basically say that your explanation is irrelevant. So either give me better case law or process my request. But yeah, I could make like a best hits album of the case law for you to post.
That would be helpful. I mean, again, we want to have people be able to step into this. And we all know, I mean, many of us have tried to do public records requests, and we end up with exactly that wall of, oh, that's overly broad. And I mean, that it's still a lot of reading to do to find an argument against that. So if it's like very narrow, kind of like, we know what they're going to do, we know how they're going to argue it at the beginning, mostly, because it's usually the thing of, oh, it's overly broad. Okay, how do we fight that? What specifically we use on those first little hits, and then hopefully people can be a little bit more comfortable. So you talked about doing this as subject matter is so great for K through 12. That's what you would recommend. You gave a great example of what the first records request for a K through 12 institution would be. What would be your best suggestion for the first request for a public university in Ohio? Or maybe we go to Tyce while you think that one.
I was going to say,
I'll give you a minute on that one.
Yield to Tyce.
Yeah, before we get too far ahead, let's pull the slideshow back up. Just can visualize some of the things we just went over. Okay, so we mentioned receiving records, and this is important for K through 12, especially like smaller local agencies, because it's up to the requester how you receive your records. And as we've said, asking for them over email and getting them as a PDF document or e-document through email is the best way. But as Ben mentioned, a lot of these places, some of them have never even done a record request. One of the problems I ran into is the Athens Health Department. They would not email me back files, no matter what. And I know they did this on purpose, and I could have probably fought with them, but they were saying that they couldn't send the emails because they were too big of files. So they had to put them on a CD, because I know CDs are just known for storing so much more space than the cloud. But so, and how they did it too is they didn't even tell me he was going to do that until he's like, your request has been completed, but I had to burn it on a CD because I couldn't email it. So I was like, okay, that's fine. I went and picked it up the same day, whatever. I don't even have a disk drive on my computer. So luckily I just went to the library.
That was the trick.
That
was the trick.
But
Yeah.
Nobody has a disk drive.
Yeah, they always try something like that. And so, especially like K through 12 schools, I could see where they were definitely just doing that because they knew who I was already. But K through 12 schools, they really because, you might have tried to send something over email, and if you just drag it in there, sometimes it'll tell you it's too big. You could actually run into some level of incompetence too, where people will try to deliver it in some other ways. E-copies over email are always free, and it's up to the requester how they're received, and it says that right in the law. So you can definitely try to argue that and get most things as e-documents. I would definitely say that, but just be wary. And maybe for some people, it's easier to get these printed out because they prefer to have them hard copied, but that's probably going to cost you like 25 cents per sheet or something. They try to charge ridiculous for a lot of those things. And then, so help them help you. Another thing that the Sunshine Manual talks about a lot is like trying to have an open communication with the requester, which we've kind of talked about with setting boundaries. We'll talk about that on the next slide too. But so like Ben mentioned, if they don't reach out to you and tell you they've started your request or something, reach out to them. It could be incompetence. It could be they're trying to hide stuff from you. Most of them are. And so make sure you keep following up with them. Make sure it's their job to help you find what you're looking for. So, and that's why it's really important too, to put in there. Here's back to setting boundaries. It's important to put in there these boundaries. Like if you deny, what I always like to say is if you deny any or part of my request, tell me why and provide specific case law why. And so I can adjust my request. So then they know right off the bat that that's something that should be told to me as soon as possible. And that way I can adjust the request or argue with them, whatever it may be. But just don't think that you can bother these people. It's their job. If they don't want to do it, they should go work somewhere else. but yeah, so this is back to setting boundaries. I like to say a date, and then especially after your first request, you'll get a lot better idea of how long each type of thing takes. If you're looking for something really specific, like a single document, you should have that by the end of the week. There's really no reason not to. And so just set that date, even if you're not really sure. Try to pick a date for, if it's going to be a bunch of emails, you probably want to do like 2 months out, around there. And then I always like to say, please inform me if you expect a delay in producing these records, or, if you don't expect to produce them by this date. So that's a good way to get them to kind of say, we'll try to complete them by then. And then it doesn't matter how they say it. If they give you a date, they can't really defend it. And it puts the pressure on them and takes away their ability to try and use those specific examples we just went over to their advantage.
And going to add something there, the reasonable time standard, one excuse you see a lot is we have a lot, like he was just saying, if you request one document, you should get it by the end of the week. So now if you say, I want this, if you give them a date that's 7 days in the future, when you expect your record by, they might be like, oh, well, we have a lot of other requests that we got. So we have to we'll fulfill the requests in the order that we receive them. But one of the case laws, and I'll have to find this to put on the sheet, that created the reasonable time standard was a lawsuit against the city of Cleveland. I think their police department. They were taking months to process like people just needing traffic reports, like for an accident. Like that's an example of a public record request. Like, so that some of these are more simple, but they were taking months to get out police reports, and they were blaming their backlog. So they were saying like, we have like a 6-month backlog of record requests, so we have to get those fulfilled first. So the courts were like, well, you can't blame your backlog. Like that's not reasonable. Like that's if they say it's going to be longer than a week because we have other record requests pending, that's not even an excuse that they're legally allowed to use. So you can immediately shut that down. And that's an example again of like, if you do that more than a few times with the record custodian, they're going to stop making excuses because they'll realize that you're serious. And we'll get to this at the end. That's why you also have to attach the threat of legal action, because if they don't see that as a possibility, then it doesn't really matter. But we'll get into that at the end.
Oh, you're muted there, Tyce.
There's just one more slide before we kind of get to the end and open it up more with everything. But so when you get your records, this is another important step too that I just want like some tips kind of, because there's some things you're going to run into. If you get 20,000 pages of documents, obviously that's going to take you a while to read. So you can search keywords on a document. If you hit Control F, it'll pop up a little box on your screen. And whatever word you type in, it'll highlight it every time on the page. You can jump right to it. So that's one of the best ways I love to just find stuff quick. Obviously, a lot of this stuff, you might want to read through it all because these people are crazy. But email chains, they're usually in reverse chronological order. So the same way like emails in your inbox appear, the newest ones are at the top, the oldest ones are at the bottom. So the first message that was sent is usually at the bottom. And so it can make reading them hard. So it's important to pay attention to the dates attached to each email. I have seen like Northeast Ohio Medicine, they sent me records that were like an Outlook file. So I can like open up the email on Outlook, which is strange, but that made it easier to read their emails. So I don't know. And then following up with new requests based on the information you obtained from previous ones. So we kind of mentioned like, if you see there's a document attached in an email and they didn't include that document, you can request it. And that's one that, I mean, I've gotten some of those back same day. They can just look up that document name right from the email and send it over to you. But yeah, so it's important to analyze the data and then, or I guess not the data, just the records. I don't know why I put data there, but and use it, continue to use it. Obviously, spread it around, post it on Facebook, get your groups together. We created a website to try to help people see our stuff, especially the kids at Ohio University. They need to see that stuff. But then, yeah, so we can definitely get into like troubleshooting, because that's kind of where we're going. Especially with this stuff, like, they know that they're breaking the law, and they're literally talking about, is what we're doing illegal? So you're going to run into some resistance, like we've said. Setting boundaries and expectations, following up, we've kind of talked about. Always going back to the Ohio Sunshine Manual, which we've kind of done as we've gone through, just to, show that's the golden book. That's what'll get you through this. Using case law, that we've been kind of talking about that a lot. Contacting superiors. So, like when Ben was talking about, he got a whole page that was redacted and shouldn't have been. Especially at universities, there's a lot of people above people that you can tell about this stuff. In the general counsels, they usually have their bottom of the barrel paralegals working the record request. And so if you send an email, you even forward that email to the top lawyer at the school, you could find that you might get things moving a little faster. And then mandamus actions is, Ben can describe this a lot better than I can, but you can take action. You can take action against them for trying to mess with you, basically.
So, like, yeah, mandamus or mandamus, I don't know. I think it's Latin. But a mandamus action, that's actually a lawsuit where you would want an attorney. So anytime, all of this case law is mandamus or mandamus complaints. So these are lawsuits filed in a court of law with an attorney. These are, this is not the only way you can take legal action against them. But all a mandamus is a injunction from a judge to make a state entity do something. So it doesn't have to apply to public records. That it's effectively what we're seeking in our lawsuits. We're seeking an action similar to this, where a judge says, that's against the law, you guys can't do that. And then they immediately have to stop if the judge orders that. And in the context of public records, all a judge is doing is determining, well, no, that's a legitimate record request, and now you have to fulfill it by this date right now, or we're going to charge you a bunch of money. And then they'll immediately fulfill your request. So that's all the case laws are from mandamus actions. But there's another thing in the Ohio, I have this, in the Ohio Court of Claims, you can file a records request complaint. And now here, I'll send this link to you, Catherine.
Yeah, and I can help you with that.
This is this is an example of a form that you could fill out. Now, these complaints to the Ohio Court of Claims. This is a process that anybody can do without an attorney, and I think the filing fee is only like $25. And what I was reading earlier is that once you file it in the Court of Claims, the state has 45 days to make a decision. So, like, and this is closer to like mediation in law. So it's going to be like the Court of Claims is going to go between you and whoever you're requesting records from, and they're going to be like, they're going to help decide, they're going to make a determination of who's right and who's wrong. And it's designed to be done without an attorney. Like, you're not going to get, I mean, as long as it's not just as long as you're not just filing something completely outrageous, like if you're, again, like, they're supposed to side with you. So if your request is done like we've described today and they won't fulfill it, you would be completely fine filing one of these at the Court of Claims. And now I've done a lot of record requests with a lot of different institutions, and I've never had to actually file one of these. But a few times and this is another thing that you can add in that first email, is you'll say, if my records aren't delivered within a reasonable amount of time, I will file a complaint in the Ohio Court of Claims to compel you to release the records. Or you can even save that for maybe it's always good to give them a chance first, but they'll probably not be friendly. And as soon as they start being unfriendly, that's when you start threatening to file a complaint, because then they know that, like, if they know that they need a good reason to deny your request, if they're going to show up in front of a court, because if the Court of Claims has to deal with some institution that's just throwing away their obligation, they hate that. So they're going to be really mad at that institution for wasting their time effectively, because the state's not making any money off of this. It's only a $25 filing fee. It's going to cost them more to deal with it than it's going to cost you to start it. So if you threaten this, that's going to make them put a lot more effort into trying to deny your request or just giving up and fulfilling your request. And so like I've never filed one of these, but what I have done is I took the form and I filled it out, and like I attached the check to the court, and I sent a picture of it to the record custodian. I was like, I'm going to submit this on Monday at 5 p.m. if I don't have my records, because this was somebody who was delaying it that long that it got to the point where I would have been okay filing this because it was that unreasonable. And then like that Monday at like 12 p.m. I got all of my record requests. So the goal is to never have to use the courts, but always reminding them that that's an option open to you, because that's going to make them listen to you, because they don't want to deal with that more than they don't want to deal with your records.
I love it. Just I'm not very good at figuring out those kinds of ways, but this is just it's fantastic. Thank you guys for figuring this out for us. All right, you want to go, Tyce?
Yeah, so I kind of just tried to make this as like a step-by-step thing to wrap it up, and then we can there's a couple questions so we can answer those too. But getting to know the public record law, rewatching this, reading through the Sunshine Manual. Also, let me link the page. They have a whole YouTube video playlist where they kind of walk through with pictures, and it's kind of nice, like how to submit a record request and all sorts of information about like what is a record. Should be able to find that. But so that's the first step. You just want to get familiar with it, like we've kind of tried today, because you're going to run into all sorts of things. Every single one of these institutions is set up a little bit different. So it's just important, like Ben's kind of said, he's gotten to know some of these, records custodians, and you can tell like who knows more and who's less knowledgeable. So all that goes into before you ever even make the record. And then so does researching. For your first time, this is kind of like you want to find those dates that something big happened. For Ohio University, it was right around when they announced their vaccine mandate. There was obviously a lot of discussion before and after on the legality of it, on whether they should do it, how they can coerce kids into doing it. So you want to try to figure out when those times are, who those people are that you want to request records from. And then the third step, obviously, requesting the records. Sending an email is the best way. Some of these places try to do like online forms that you fill out. I'm not a fan of that because it doesn't give as much flexibility for some of the stuff we mentioned, like giving a time frame, setting boundaries, expectations, things like that. And then the fourth step is following up, making sure they're delivered to you in a reasonable time, promptly, and just helping them find what you're looking for too. One time I was doing a request at Ohio University, and one thing they like to do is find junk mail that they can like convince themselves, I guess. They know you don't want to see their junk mail, but they convince themselves, because this junk mail is talking about COVID vaccine mandates, that you should get that too. So I asked like specifically to not include things from outside newsletters, and so that you can work with these people. It's their job, and so make them work for you. We pay these people taxes to do this stuff. And then analyzing the data, obviously, and analyzing the records you get. You got to find what they say. You got to show the people in your community. That's a great way you can make this change for free. You can show people the behind the scenes, and it's a really good way to show people this isn't all some crazy, they're just following the rules, or they're not trying to protect anybody. They're following the rules. That's really what they're doing. And they're following orders. And there's a hierarchy that you'll start to see through all of it. And then after that analyzing stage, you go back, that ties back into researching and doing your next request, finding the next part of the puzzle or the next piece of the timeline that came after that. And so, yeah, I would just say the best way to get into it is like just to start doing it. I was lucky to have Ben like teach me how to do it. And at first still like it was really confusing, but then what kind of just helped a lot was just going through and doing it and the process of getting records. And I just started record requesting from anywhere I could think, like the health departments, I even requested some stuff from the Athens High School just cause. And so it's just important to start doing it. You can do it for free. You can do it from home. And so, yeah, I think this is really valuable stuff that everybody can do to start making change and holding these government agencies accountable.
Another thing that's good to know, in Ohio, you don't even have to be a citizen of the United States to make a record request to a public institution. You don't even have to be in the country. You could be in Egypt by the pyramids and send a record request to University of Cincinnati on your phone. But also, you don't have to disclose your identity. So one thing, I created like a Gmail account, which was I like to have fun when I'm doing this. So I created it was like smokinggun302@gmail.com, just as like a joke. But I would use that to send requests to other schools because I knew they were all talking to each other. So I was trying to create a little bit of mystery. And some requests I'd send to UC, I'd use my email, but sometimes I'd use another email. And sometimes I would make requests from the same request from the same institution with both emails just to see if I would get the same emails. But that's a good, especially the K through 12 institution, you can just make a throwaway email to use for your record request because they're going to send the records back to your email if they're doing digital file. So you don't even have to disclose who you are, which can be helpful, especially like Catherine was saying in small communities where everybody knows each other. They don't have to know who you are.
That is a really helpful thing as well. Or in instances where it's at a university where the student feels threatened, basically, that they don't want their identity revealed because there is retaliatory behavior, unfortunately, in these institutions that should be supporting students and not threatening them. So I mean that's thank you for bringing that one up. It is really important. You don't even have to put your name on this. You can be completely anonymous and it's all good. You can use different emails, whatever you want, and they still have to reply there. So I have a couple of questions there. I mean, were you able to think of any idea there about the what you might think is a really good starting request for a university there? We get to think about that a little longer.
Yeah, university. I mean, really, I'd say the same thing. Like every time you start, go to the school's website, and specifically look for announcements about the COVID policies, or find like if you're a student, like go in your student email. Look for emails they sent out about it. Find the employees that are in charge, like Tyce said. Find the person who's like the poster child of the COVID response, and then figure out everybody they were working with. But for the first request, pick 1, 2, 3 people that you think made the most decisions. You think spent the most time making these policies. Those are your people. And in one email, you can send multiple requests. So you can say like each bulleted point is a separate request, or I'll do like numbered. I'll say like each item is a separate request. So you'll say like number 1, all emails from at UC, it was Dr. Dustin Calhoun. He was our poster child. So I'll say like emails sent to and from Dr. Dustin Calhoun. And then for the date, you find what I did was like, okay, this is the date that they announced the requirement for a vaccine. And at that point that I was making the request, it was already like 2 months past. So I went from that date to the present, and then like 3 months before that date. So then you're getting all of their plans coming to the announcement, and then their reaction, like how they reacted after the announcement. So like Tyce was saying, for the date range, find an important date, and then put that in the middle of the 6-month period. So this is for the first request. So we're looking for a lot of records. So the employee, that 6-month period, and then the subject matter, which I would just try to start K through 12 or university. It's going to be the same, but I would start with COVID response as your subject matter. So you don't have to. I found that even just saying all emails sent to and from versus just saying emails sent to and from, because sometimes they'll be like, you can't request all emails, but then I'll send them back a request. I'll be like, okay, I just want the emails sent to and from, because they'll say that saying all emails is overly broad. So just keep it simple. Just say emails to and from Dr. Dustin Calhoun between this date and this date pertaining to the university or pertaining to the school's COVID-19 response. And then see if they'll process it. Is COVID-19, they might say COVID-19 response is too broad. And if that's the case, and then so for that, you would have the same date range and the same subject matter on requests 1, 2, and 3, but on the only difference between 1, 2, and 3 is the name of the employee. So you have Dr. Dustin Calhoun, you have Dr. Valerio Ferme, who was actually not a medical doctor. He was a doctor in English or something, but he was also one of our medical professionals. And then you could have like the president of the school or the principal or something. So those are your 3. You have the same subject matter, same time range, but different employees for each request. So then you have that case law that says subject matter, temporary limited, and specific employee concern. So you're like, boom, boom, boom. Each of these records is defined enough for you to find them. Now, if this is how you push back at them. If they say COVID-19 response is too broad of a subject matter, you'll take those 3 record requests and you turn them into 9 record requests. So now you have 1, 2, 3, all Dr. Dustin Calhoun, all the same time range. But instead of the subject matter being COVID-19 response, you have pertaining to mandatory vaccination, pertaining to mandatory masking, pertaining to student quarantine. And then you do another 3 requests for the second employee you had doing the same 3 subject matters. And so each time they make you make the subject matter more specific, just triple the number of requests you make, because there's no limit. They can't limit the number of requests you can make unless you're a news agency. So if you're using the records for a profitable reason, then there's a limit on how many you can make it per month. But if you're just a private citizen, you can make unlimited record requests to an institution. So what I like to do is every time, and they have an obligation to fulfill all of them. So every time they try to tell me my record request is too broad, I just send them more requests, because then every time they make you revise it, make it harder for them, because then they'll stop making you revise it. As it got to the point, like the UC record custodian and I really know each other very well. And it got to the point where by the end, he would just fulfill every request I sent in, because he knew that I would just keep expanding them so I always ended up with the records I wanted. But it's not of science. It's an art. Like every custodian's different, but like always, that's like what I said at the beginning. Go for the broadest request you can. So start with the broadest topic and then have some ideas of how you could narrow it. But for the first request, you want thousands of emails if you can get them, because then you have all that information. And now all of a sudden you're seeing, oh, well, this employee wasn't listed on their website on the COVID team, but they were doing a lot of work on this. So now I'm going to request emails from them. And it looks like they had a big meeting in this week. So now instead of a 6-month time period for your second set of record requests, you can say, I want only the emails in this week. And then when you only have a week time frame, you don't have to say, I expect these to be delivered in 2 months. You can say, I expect to have these in 2 weeks, because it's only a week long of emails. So the first request is as broad as possible so that you can understand what actually happened. And then based on what you see in that, you can target more specific details that you're learning about. So it's kind of like a big tree of requests in a way.
That is awesome. I do want to call up some of the stuff that Tyce is doing in the comments here. So for people who are listener type things. So we had the question of, do you have a pretty good idea of the names of employees at other universities that are part of the IUC, starting place for requests at those universities? And Tyce, you've been answering that question and adding all this stuff. If you want to briefly talk about what you were answering there, and of course people have to go and check these links, and we have that information here, and I'll talk in a little bit about other things. So yeah, go Tyce.
Yeah. So whatever college you're at in Ohio, this is going to be more specific to colleges, because K through 12 schools aren't going to have this stuff probably on their website, but you can check same way. What I would start by doing is go to the president's office page. So Here, let me pull up OU's quick just so I can like reference it. Oh, it pulled up the very first president. So you want to go to the office of the president, wherever it is, at whatever school you're at, and you can go here, and I can pull up the president's council. And so Eric Burchard, for example, he's the executive director of government relations. He was one of the guys that was part of the core cabal, and he's also the main guy that communicates between the president's office at the school and the IUC. So the way I found out about Eric Burchard, the first time I ever seen his name was in the cabal email, but so then once I saw that he was one of the ones in these conversations in between the schools, I knew to request records from him. Another fun thing I like to do is send emails to him that are incriminating. And that's why the first request is so important. And you get your foot in the door. You'll have it's even if they give you a bunch of junk in these conversations, you're going to see the people that are communicating, right? Like these groups behind the scene, because even like we had a page for our whole COVID team, but a lot of the people that were in like these core groups making these decisions, they weren't publicly advertised like Jillian Ice and all them were. Obviously Jillian Ice she's a key player, and she thinks she's also a superwoman or something for wearing a mask. But yeah, so it just depends, like if in your location, you're kind of going to get an idea, like how Ben was saying it, whoever the poster child for COVID is, like who talks about COVID at the school the most, what employee does. They're a good place to start, because it kind of correlates with their emails behind the scenes, and also the way they talk about stuff in public, and kind of expose their ignorance a lot of times. So then there's going to be plenty of ignorance in their emails that they thought were private.
Oh, go ahead.
So yeah, I mean, I would just say you got to start it, and try to get your friends together. Like I had my friends start, just my roommates. I would tell them to send in public records requests too, because I knew our records custodian, she was trying to do still to this day, my very first record request hasn't been completed. It's only been completed in parts.
She's not good. The OU one?
No,
she's not
terrible.
Fun to deal with.
She gives me lip now. Like I used one of my fake emails to send something, and she mentioned that she figured it out. Like, congratulations. I really couldn't care less. Give me the emails. Yeah. She got an email from Joe DiMaggio.
Yeah.
And so it's like, and she can probably just tell by the way I like word my specific ones, but it's just like get other people involved. It's really easy to start the process. You might run into some trouble, but at the end of the day, like that's what we want. Like we want these colleges to be on notice, and this is a great way to do it. And like it's definitely really important. My favorite thing, like I said, is to send the emails back to people. So when I get somebody saying something really stupid, like I know they were talking about if they were allowed to use the test because they didn't know if they contained genetic code information. Like they obviously do. And so sometimes I'll just take those emails and send them to everybody that works with them. And so like if someone sounds really dumb, show the people how dumb they sound, so they're less inclined to carry out these mandates that are discriminatory, they're anti-science. We can go on all day about all that stuff, but
and the more people that know in the institution that you're reading all the emails going to this person, the less likely people are to email that person in the future. So it's but these people, all state employees, I'm pretty sure I read this somewhere once. I don't know for sure, but I'm sure the universities do this. When you get hired there, they have a little training video that they show you saying, hey, everything you write in your email is a public record. And everybody forgets about that training video, just like any training video we watch at our jobs. It just immediately goes out the window, and you're like, that's never going to be me. But then eventually it is you. But they should fear what they're writing in that email, because they're supposed to be held accountable to us. Like, they're working on the taxpayer's dime. So they should be acting with more caution than they are. And that's like, this is the getting the records is one thing, but how you use them is a totally different thing. Like another example, like what Tyce was saying, and this is why it's good to be anonymous, because when you do it anonymously, you get the emails. And then this is something that happened to me. This was I was emailing. This is still very early on. I had just received my first record request from UC regarding the COVID response, and Dr. Dustin Calhoun. I mean, before I got my records, I was sending this guy like not pretty angry emails, but they were like, I was asking him questions. I was like, how can you do this with this state law? Like, can you please just explain this to me? And eventually, this one Sunday night, he actually emailed me back, which shocked me because he would never respond to my emails because he really only, and I read all this guy's emails. So like, he really only responded to people that were in support of what he was doing. And then he would just like thank them for like hours. But if you were against the mandatory vaccination, then they didn't want to deal with you at all. But I think it was because I started emailing other people, saying like, hey, Dr. Calhoun's not answering any of my questions. Somebody made him email me back. And this was like 2 days after I received all of his emails. And I was asking him specifically, I was like, well, if you look at HB 244, what you're doing isn't legal at all. Like, can you explain this? And then he emailed me a response where he said this nonsense that I literally read the emails where they planned out this response. They're like, if people ask this, then this is what you tell them. And so he sent me that response. And then when I sent him back, I was like, well, then what did you mean in this email that you sent to these people like a week ago? And I was like, could you explain this? And the first couple emails he sent me was all like, he was all sounding like a scientist. He's like, well, Comirnaty and Pfizer are like chemically the same, and la-da-da-da-da antibodies, like talking all big brained. And then when I sent him his email back, and I was like, well, you said the opposite in your personal email a week ago as to what you're telling me right now. Then he was just like, I'll get back to you, and never responded to me again. So like, if you send in these requests anonymous, you see what's going on, then you can come in as yourself and ask these people a question. And then if they're contradicting what you've already read, you send it to them and make them answer to that. Like, but there is value in them not knowing who you are, because it makes it a lot more confusing for them. Like, there's a lot of confusion you can cause when you have access to all these emails, because like I said, like, even though they're public records, the people that work at these institutions don't read each other's emails. It was funny one time, also a fun fact, the W-2 of any state employee is a public record, even though the record custodian at OU said that they aren't. They are, because I have like dozens of them from different people. Just if you want to see how much anybody's getting paid, you can request their W-2, which that is useful information for the same reason. But where was I going with that? It's just the amount of information you can find out is impressive.
Which is also part of the problem here as well, because that's been another issue with this. I mean, what you guys have done from your respective schools and stuff, and Tyce, you put this up on the Save Ohio U, and one thing that I would really love to see happen is, you know, each person who does this kind of stuff, either through universities or the K through 12 public schools and stuff, or even if somebody happens upon a way to access communications between private schools and some of the public institutions, because we know that it's probably a very similar communication structure throughout the state. It's going to be very similar. Might even be the same institutions, public institutions, doing that communication. And I really want to have a centralized place for where, you know, people can, when they're asking things like things like you guys finding out about the IUC, which affects, you know, all the public universities in Ohio are part of that, and just those kinds of things. So I actually do have a website. It does actually exist, but I had set it up for putting up the data, but data has become completely unimportant at this point, and it was a whole lot of work. And so it's all functional, it's all there. It just didn't have any data on it. And I think what I'll be doing is working with my web designer to set up exactly some kind of a central repository or link out to Save Ohio U or anything else like that. And also any of these the documents you've shown today, the PowerPoint and links and all that kind of stuff, or anything of that nature to centralize it there. But that will take me a little bit of time, unfortunately. And I wanted to say that I can put up, because there have been questions about, can I put up the PowerPoint? And I can, but only in my Understanding Ohio COVID-19 data page or group page, because Facebook doesn't allow files to be attached in pages like Beyond the Data, but it does allow it in the group page. So I'm putting some of these documents up there so people can access it there, and I will put a link in the comments here to go there. So at least there's kind of a repository for it for now, but hopefully soon I can start building up a repository on a separate website as well, so that people can start exchanging what they're discovering in their own little areas, and then hopefully, exchange more of these tips and tricks. So we know that they're all coordinated. We just need to know exactly how, and who knows which little thread is the one that leads us there.
Yeah, we're gonna, with No College Mandates, which is an organization that just has been trying to group together like parents across the country. A lot of people, I see a bunch of people in those groups that I know, but we're trying to set up a campaign right now, and our goal is to link all these people across the country who get these people started doing record requests at all these little organizations. Some of the big schools are the ones that are getting caught, but no doubt we're seeing in these emails and a lot of these big records coming out from the big schools that a lot of these little schools are involved too. There's a lot of federal funding that's gone in. I don't know if people really see how, I don't know if people have heard about the Diffuse project that was leaked out, but in 2017, the Department of Defense started granting a lot of money to these places. Peter Daszak and Ralph Barrick at University of North Carolina, for example, to specifically put a furin cleavage site in the SARS-CoV genome. And mysteriously, of course, 3 years later, a SARS-CoV-2 with the furin cleavage site starts spreading. And so it's really coming out now that there's a lot of evidence that this started at the schools, and it's more than just the schools wanting to mandate these things because the CDC recommended them or something like that. Years ago, these schools agreed to a lot of things that have kind of just snowballed into this. For these schools not to hold up these mandates, it's almost like against what they've been planning. And so when you're looking through this stuff, there is so much you can find. This is how we found that they were working on the SARS-CoV-2 genome with furin cleavage sites at the University of North Carolina, in Maryland at Fort D, and there's all these little places. I live right by the Worcester, Ohio campus. They've been working on coronaviruses there for my entire lifetime. So I just think it's very valuable to get an idea of a lot of these things, and you'll just find someone's going to uncover something. And this is what I kind of wanted to get into. Like, when you find that first big thing in your record request, it feels great. Like, you'll find a lot of relief when you see what these people are talking about, because I'm sure basically everybody listening to this knows that they're up to no good, and they'll flat out tell you in a lot of their emails, like when they call themselves a cabal.
All right. Is there anything else you guys want to add? We're at about an hour and a half here. So, I mean, this to me, I think this is absolutely fantastic. I mean, I don't have any kids in public school, but I'm tempted to start picking at something, because you guys have made it a lot clearer. I love the tips. And I really hope people start filing, and especially right now, because we know what's going to happen in the fall, or what they're going to try to get to happen in the fall. And starting now is a great time to do it, because I do get questions all the time. What do you think is going to happen in the fall? And or what is this school planning on doing, or how do we deal with it? And I think this is a good way to head them off at the pass. I mean, you start making those requests and start revealing what their thought process, which is usually nonsensical or whatever, before it ever happens. It's not going to be, we would not be in a position of catch up like we have been for the last 2 years. Instead, we already would know what they had discussed and how they're planning on doing all this stuff, and have built up the experience to quickly request certain things when they do this kind of stuff. So I think this is a really great, thing to start here in the summer, when there's all this question about, I'm concerned about what's coming up next. Now is a great time to get started and build up these connections and communities where this kind of information can be shared, and you can learn more. So
I'd say, can I just butt in?
Yes.
Let's make this a challenge quick, because I've heard this a lot too. Like, what do you think they're going to do next semester? There's all these ramblings. I've actually sent out, because I've got some documents back from the IUC schools of their future COVID plans. And so, especially in the Ohio Sunshine Manual, I'm pretty sure they talk about this specifically. Planning and planning documents, committees, things like that are very specifically part of public record. So if everybody listening to this went to their local school district, whether you even have people in school, whatever, you can go request right now. You can ask specifically for their planning, because all these schools are planning for it, obviously, when the semester and school year starts again. You can ask for their documents pertaining to COVID-19 planning at the beginning of the semester or school year. And they can send you those documents right now, because they have them. And I've gotten a lot of them back, and in there, it's interesting to read. You'll see their thoughts on how they're like, most of them are setting triggers right now is what people are going to see. So they're like, how they can justify it, right? Like, how many cases, whatever, do we need to get to that we think we can justify it? But yeah, so that, I would say, if you want to get started tonight, you could just send an email, get it started, open that dialogue with whoever's the record custodian at your local place with that, because a lot of places might be weird about getting you those records. Like, start bothering them, start asking. You can even call them. You can call the school tomorrow on the phone, and you can ask them, I'm looking for these records, and ask them to find them. They can show you them in person. That's a way you can request records if that works better for you than emailing. So there's a lot of people can do.
Like when I did one for my high school, and this is another tip for K through 12 more, because most state universities, you'll be able to find their website, like an email for their records department, but most K through 12 institutions, that doesn't exist. There's no records department. So what I would suggest to start there is email, look at the administrator's office, just find the secretary or whatever, email the principal, just email somebody that's in the office of the school and ask them where to send record requests. And again, you could do that anonymously if you want to. But then that way, it's just more efficient to actually send the request to the person who's going to process it, because otherwise everybody just gets really confused. They might get confused just trying to answer that question. So if they don't answer it, just keep emailing them, asking for the record, asking where to send a record request. That's the question. Where do I have a record request? Who should I send it to? Because if you just send 10 record requests to the principal, then they're just going to be upset because they don't want to deal with that.
All right. Well, thank you both so much for doing this and for doing all that work and figuring out how to do this, how to deal with this process and taking this time to enlighten us all. And I'm really excited about what kind of trouble we can all cause here, because it's about time to cause some real trouble for these people. So all right. So thank you guys. And thank you everyone for watching. Share this away. We want as many people doing this and causing trouble as we can. So thank you, Ben. Thank you, Tyce. Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Have a good one.